the tape is an interview with Mrs. Glen Conklin. It will be a story of early day Oklahoma. The old club hotel, now inundated, or nearly so, by the waters of the newly formed lake, and the art collection now found in Philbrook, which once hung on the walls there. This was a most unusual pioneer Oklahoma family. We have asked Mrs. Conklin to begin with her own name and then that of her parents. We'll be glad to hear everything we can about these early day people.
My name before I was married was Madeline Clubb. I was the daughter of Ike and Laura Clubb, which they were called in the early days. My father was born near Hot Springs, Arkansas. In the early days, he became a worker with pioneer cowboys and worked with many of them. He was 19 years old when he came to Honeywell, Kansas, and was working in southern Kansas, northern Oklahoma region since 1882. After he came to this area. During the spring of 1882, he was one of the group of cowboys hired by Galloway and Forsyth. They drove a herd of cattle from 18 miles northeast of Hot Springs in Garland County, Arkansas, to a point in southwest Missouri. And then he returned to Arkansas and helped another herd from Lawrence. Then he drove other herds from different areas, and this is why he began his career as a cowboy and rancher. It was in the fall. He was sent to Honeywell to help build fence on the huge maintained ranch by Galloway and Forsyth for about 600 cattle, and he stayed there a year. Then he severed his connections and went to Red Rock, where he worked for Tom Snow and Ed Reynolds. They were the owners of the S&H outfit, whose cattle brand was a 7L, the insignia being figure 7 with a bar at the bottom. This S&R was a part of the Big Pond Creek cattle pool, sharing a 90,000-acre range with stock owned by Jim Hamilton, brand the Open A, with John Blair. And this bore a brand formed by a downturned crescent over the letter T. All the 90,000 acres was fenced together, and the club managed the operations of this outfit for the enormous range. When he quit this outfit after 6.5 years in the Cherokee Strip, he had his own herd of cattle and took them to Oklahoma to a range in Logan County east of Sheridan on Skeleton Creek. And there he bought a claim in 1891, 2 years after the run into Old Oklahoma, and he filed a claim on this place. It's
Is that the Ponca City?
No, this is over in Logan County.
Logan County.
Mm-hmm. And it was while he was in this section of Oklahoma that he met my mother, who they say was the charming young Laura Rutherford. Truly she was, now famous and was famous for her art collection. And she came to that part of the country with her parents in 1891 approximately, from Missouri. She had had her early education in Missouri and Kansas, and they were married in Kingfisher in July 1892. When after their marriage, they moved to a range south of Garber near Covington, where they lived for a couple of years before he bought 2 Indian leases on Little Beaver Creek in the Caw Country, which is 6 miles north and 1 mile east of Caw City. He continued to manage his cattle and interests, and then later bought a Rio Grande uh, ranch or fruit um, plantation. And then later he built the Club Hotel. That was after, in 1923, after they were fortunate enough to strike oil on their ranch out north. And but during the years while they were married and living out on the ranch in the Caw country, my mother taught school and also was a good pioneer housewife, raising little calves who'd lost their mothers at birth. And she made butter, took care of chickens, sold these things, and saved the money. She always was fond of good literature, good music. And she had a great desire for these things. And each day after her baking and cooking in the afternoon, she sat down to rest, but not to just sit and hold her hand. She read good books, good literature, which she loved dearly. She also liked good music, and I can remember that she bought an Edison. My father couldn't understand this. He was a cowboy through and through, but I think he really, all in all, he enjoyed the things that she did too. But she managed to save back enough money to continue her education. She taught school also during this time when she lived out there. And once while he was away, there was a drought, and the corn was burning up. So when he returned, he just expected to find it gone. But she had hired 25 hands, and they were all out there cutting the corn and saving as much as they could for feed during the coming months. And that helped a great deal. But it was a hard life, as all pioneers must have lived. And they worked together, and she saved enough and went to Northwestern to study literature and art, and graduated there with a degree in oratory. And
I didn't know anyone else had that degree. It was called Bachelor of Oratory. That was B.O.
Yes.
And then later the magazines picked it up as an advertisement for Listerine.
Oh.
Don't you remember? And said, do you have B.O.? So I changed mine to B-sharp.
Well, they call it elocution also.
Oh,
she
yeah.
called it
Mine
elocution.
was a B.O.
I don't know how hers was, but she saved enough money after her graduation to make a trip with her class to Europe. And this is where she visited so many of the art galleries and fell in love with the beautiful art. And this is where it started. But she had no money to purchase paintings, but she would try to get copies or replicas of this sort of thing. Her interest in life was always great. Everything and everyone. Both my parents were kind and good to everyone, honest as the day is long.
Outgoing people,
outgoing,
civic-minded.
They helped their folks and many other people and organizations. They gave also to the church and different.
All of the institutions of those pioneer days, I guess.
And after her going to
we have this outline now. Praise God. Let's run this back now. Would you like to?
I'm sure I'm.
I don't want to erase this now, because we got some good stuff.
He's the president of the East National Bank, Newkirk, and some of the pioneers of Newkirk.
Okay.
You got it on. Wait.
In telling about my parents, I'd like to tell a few little things that are rather um, fond memories to me, and some of them a little funny. I remember as a child on the farm, my father went always with his trainloads of cattle to Kansas City, and once when he returned, it was at night, and I was rather sleepy, but my mother kept me up, so I wondered why, but he came in, she said, he'll be here in a little bit, but in he walked, and right into the back end of the house. He was leading a small pony for me. Always before I had ridden on the front of his saddle on a big pill off the bed, you know, as he rode fence. And also
How old were you when you started riding?
Oh, very young,
Probably
before
about-
I started school.
By the time you could walk almost.
Yes. And I loved everything. I thought everything he said and did was just it, and he was a wonderful person. He did many things for me. Once I remember being in town, and we didn't have the money. We lived on the ranch, and I saw a little roll-top desk, and I kept going back to look at it, and I knew that he had told me this, but I didn't beg for it. Finally, he walked in and bought it for me, and I still have that, but it certainly is.
That's a prized possession, isn't it?
But also, when we'd go to town for Staples, I always rode with him with my straw hat on to protect my face from sunburning, and each patch of Sweet Williams were prettier than the last, so he'd stop the wagon and get down and pick another bouquet for me. But I remember those as such wonderful times, and going to town with him and going to the drugstore for an ice cream cone. Those are things a lot of people may have done, but those are fond memories. He did many other things, and so did my mother, but as far as punishing, she would once in a while think that he should do it, but it was such an ordeal. Getting ready to do it, she would laugh finally, and but I do remember that. But getting back to the art, she was not able to begin collecting art until they struck oil on their ranch.
Oh, yes.
Out in the cow country where they had this.
But she had already been to Europe?
Yes, she'd gone with her class.
With her milk and butter money and her...
Mm-hmm. Yes, she had gone to Europe
She
with
had
her
saved
class.
the money.
Yes. And she became so interested, and of course she loved good books, and she began collecting paintings and hung them in her home at first, and I remember when people came, she always took them through the house to see them, because she loved to show what she loved.
Wow.
And was very generous in doing this.
About what year was that?
1923. It's about the
I
time.
just wondered how far back that cultural interest would date in our pioneers.
Well, that's quite a while back
Yeah.
now. But
And she had been interested for many years.
oh yes,
Prior to
and
that.
she had read good literature for years and always loved art and music, but she especially collected books, and of course graduating in oratory, she had quite a few good books, and later she collected those. She gave quite a library to the Oklahoma City University.
Oh.
And a mural to Salina, Kansas, where she had attended school at one time. And then the art collection was given to Philbrook in 1947, October 1947. And she said that she wanted to do this before she was gone, because she wanted to leave it to people in Oklahoma.
That's right.
As because she'd lived here all of her life, and she liked to, most of her life, and she'd like to leave it where she had acquired it, and the place she loved, and the culture to be this part of the country.
Is it, was it kept there under the name of Conklin in the Philbrook, is it cataloged that way? Or
Club, Laura A. Club
in the
collection.
club collection.
Mm-hmm.
And is it kept together?
Yes,
Or
they have to rotate. They have to
I know
rotate
they
the
do.
paintings because they do not have room to hang the complete collection.
That's right.
And one time during the year, I think it's for 3 months, they will have most of the paintings hanging. But at one time, she bought a cattle picture which had 3 or 4 cattle in it, and my father asked her how much she paid for it. And she said $12,500. He says, "My laws almighty, I could have bought a trainload of cattle for that." And but he loved
He was
them.
the rancher at heart,
Mhm.
still.
But he loved them, and he enjoyed people coming. He moved back to Ponca City in the latter years of his life and lived there in the hotel. And he enjoyed the people coming to see the collection. And the large painting, Christ and the Children, is one that is one of the most outstanding.
Yeah.
First, it's a very large one,
And that's by...
it is by J. Frank Kirschbach.
Mhm.
It was exhibited in many countries in Europe and belonged to a family in England, but they couldn't pay the tax on it. It was sold and brought to this country, and she purchased it here in the United States. So
Now that's very large, isn't it?
it's quite large, and I don't have the dimensions. It covered all of one wall in the lobby, and it is a picture of Christ with 3 little children near, and all the different nationalities of the biblical times gathered around listening to him at Jacob's well. And it's taken from the Scripture, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." They love children. And of course this is shown in a lot of the paintings that she selected. And she had the most wonderful collection of Thomas Moran's, I guess, that was ever collected at one time. And she was considered...
Was it kept intact? I mean...
she doesn't have all of those in this collection.
In Philbrook.
Mm-hmm. But she has several of them. But maybe I should stop a minute here.
Would you like to rest a minute? Is your both tired?
I'm just wondering how I've skipped around here the way I've told it, that you all probably think on.
And suppose we take a tour through the hotel at Ponca City. And I believe you had a leaflet here on paintings
She was...
as they would be. Suppose you just take us on a tour through that, hitting the more prominent paintings that they had.
This gives a little bit about the large painting, and I could give more on that, but perhaps I better go on and mention a number of the others. Kirschbach, I mentioned the large one of Christ and the Children, and then the one by Chase, which is called Lady in the Blue Kimono, and the chickens. The artist was unknown on that one. By the way, when they took the collection to Philbrook, my father was still living, and he asked that that one be left until he was gone. I suppose that he cared for that because he remembered the things in the
That was
past.
his life.
And then Salome by Papritz and Richard Wilson.
Now that came
The White
from European museum, didn't it?
Yes. And Worthington Whitridge, a painting called Morning in the Woods, and Deer in Fontainebleau by Rosa Bonheur. And
That should be
it was a very nice.
very well known.
And Bird Dogs by Edmund Ostos. And Rural Scene in Holland by
You know
Maurice.
where she got these?
She collected them from different dealers, and she went different places to art galleries
She
and
kept
bought
in
them.
touch with
Yes,
dealers,
and a lot of the
which ones were
dealers.
coming up where, I guess.
Yes, and Manny knew what she was interested in, and she wanted a number of different artists represented in the collection. This is for the reason for her trading. Some of the ones maybe she had 2 by 1 artist. She kept the one she particularly liked, but she wanted a variety of different artists represented.
So she trade one to get the new one.
And then Hikaris by Elizabeth Gardner, which is a very beautiful painting. And there is one by Hopner, James Orchard, and Benjamin West portrait.
What was that, Benjamin West?
That was, pardon me. It's just called Portrait. I'm sorry. Mrs. Hudson is the name of the painting by Sir Peter Lely, who was a well-known painter.
Yes.
And Caspar Netcher painted The Death of Cleopatra. Head of an Old Man by Detrichy. And I've mentioned some of these. Portrait by Lawrence. That was a beautiful girl's head. An Artist's Wife by Jacquet. Madonna and Child in St. John. Shivani was the artist.
Shivani? That must have been a prize in its day.
Oh, it's beautiful. It hangs at the Philbrook. I think it's up all the time. Avenue of Trees by Corot.
My goodness.
Head of St. Peter by Balling.
I'd forgotten that was there.
The Coastal Scene by Dabinia. And she had several Ballancs, Henry Ballanc.
Didn't she have a Gainsborough?
Yes. And Schreier, that painting was called The Cossacks. And
how many did she have in all?
Approximately 200. Of course, some were hanging in her home, but
and Philbrook actually received about how many?
I imagine close to 100. I have a list of them.
About what was the value? Did you ever?
The whole collection was valued at $1,500,000.
I'm sure that much. It'd be worth more today.
There was an Indian painting by Sharp, California Landscape Keith and Dutch Family Kiever, Grapes and Peaches Woodruff, Still Life by Desgoff, Pine Trees Jeffers, Peaches and Grapes Woodruff. He was here in Ponca City at one time. I think you probably might know him. And
did he didn't live here?
No, when Mr. and Miss Calkins were here, they collected paintings too, and they came to Ponca City. And Dunton.
He had a showing here, probably.
Yes, and he painted quite a bit of the fruit pictures, quite a few of the fruit.
Did she have very many westerns in her collection?
Not many. She had a lot of Indian. She once had bronze, Remington bronze on her library table, but she gave it to my husband, and it seemed once for his birthday, and it seemed that it belonged there. It had been there so long, and we didn't take it. And in one of her dealings, she traded off. I think perhaps she...
You should have taken it.
Oh, we just almost cry every time we think of that. And The Musicians by Dennis, Roses by Weir, that hangs all the time at the entrance of Philbrook. It's a small painting, but it's very nice. On the Lake Shore by Monaga. And let's see, I'll get down. Still Life by Chase, Rocky Mountain Scene, Bierstadt, and The Old Man, J.G. Brown. That was a very interesting.
That was the most interesting.
And he
remember that
also
one.
painted the little musician, the little boy. And
His face in the old man was so steamy and had
his
so
eyes
much character. in it.
Yes, it did.
And that was his eyes were as alive. I remember that one.
So many people do. And then the Tragedy by Pio, and Indian Encampment by Blakelock. And then there was one by Sir William Beechey, his portrait, and Gentleman in a Claret Coat, Gilbert Stuart.
Yes.
And she also had Washington by Stuart. And then Rest and Harvest by William Bouguereau, and Girl with a Violin, William Chase. Milking Time, Gainsborough.
There's the one now.
And Italian Tyrol by Ennis. Farmstead by Constable.
I wonder how much that in it was valued.
I could look it up. I don't remember right now, but it was very valuable.
It must have been.
Sheep by Jacquet, and Portrait of Miss Williams by Opie. In the Pasture, Van Mark. And this is the one my father referred to. Cattle are the central figures in practically all of his paintings. And he said that he could have bought a trainload of cattle for the price of that one picture.
I think that's interesting the way he valued it.
And then there was The Grandmother by Arts, and Landscape by Wyant, Cattle by Howe, In the Adirondacks, Homer D. Martin, and then another by George Ennis. Medfield, Massachusetts was the title of that. Yes. And then the Moran collection. And that, here it says in the booklet, of the well-known collection of 9 Thomas Moran paintings owned by Mrs. Clubb, George H. Ainsley, world-famous art collector and dealer, says, perhaps no other collection of canvases by a single artist is so representative of the talents of the painter as the Laura A. Clubb collection of paintings by Thomas Moran. Each of the canvases in itself is a priceless gem. The collection is a gorgeous tiara. Moran is one of the greatest masters of color that modern art has known. From the brilliantly picturesque Pearl of the Adriatic to the quiet, lovely Long Island landscape, these paintings are tributes to Moran's talent and versatility. Then it gives a list of the ones. She had one of the Grand Canyon, one mid-ocean, autumn, slaves escaping through the swamps, glancing through these hurriedly. Can't see all of those. Then there was Miss Denham by John Hopner, and Rest on the Flight from Egypt. This was painted by 3 artists, Peter Paul Rubens, Hendrik van Balen, Johann Rottenhammer, and Jan Bruegel. 4. Madonna by Murillo, Sunset, George Ennis.
What Madonna is that? You remember?
It's Spanish Madonna. It's a contemporary. Murillo was a contemporary of Velázquez, of course, and enjoyed great popularity during his lifetime and afterward. And he specialized in religious paintings and that sort of thing. It's otherwise George Ennis. Do you want these? And then she had another Hopner and Dervey Lehman and David Teniers Jr. The Surprise, it's called. Going Home by Israel. She loved that one. It was an old woman who was trudging along homeward. And then
after a day's work, a peasant, wasn't it?
Yes. Now this gives the list of Morans I was trying to find, but was I mentioned Slaves Escaping Through the Swamps by Moran. These others also, Mid-Atlantic, Grand Canyon, Autumn, and she had others, but there was the Madonna by Dangerfield, Mary Hornick, Sir Joshua Reynolds, Waiting, Hagberg, The Flax Spinner by Breton,
That's pretty.
and another Keever, Milking Time, Elliot Dangerfield, Irish Lake Wyatt.
I imagine that your father liked that, didn't he?
Oh yes, he enjoyed all of them, I'm sure, and he loved to talk to the people when they came and would tell them as much as he could of the paintings, you know, after he'd
Yeah.
heard it many times. Then
So he grew into it then, by
yes,
virtue
he
of
really
being with your mother.
Mhm. I think we all did. The whole family did.
I'm sure you did. Wasn't it a wonderful background for
It
you?
certainly was for our children and for
Yes,
us.
and grandchildren.
And my husband was
Were
art
you
too.
an artist?
No, I was not. I enjoy it thoroughly, and
You
have
have a
taken
very deep
lessons.
appreciation for
I
it,
certainly do.
and a wonderful background for it. And your daughters, I believe you.
Yes, my eldest daughter, Annette, her name is Klein now, Miss Bob Klein, has majored in
Really?
art at first 2 years at Stevens in Columbia, and then went to OU and completed. Then she
Was
is
your mother
working.
at school in Missouri?
She
You
went
said
to
she went back to school.
yes, but she didn't go back to Missouri to school.
Uh-huh.
She got her early education in Missouri and Kansas, and then came down to Oklahoma with her parents and went to the first normal, and which was before Oklahoma was a state, and got a certificate to teach. You
Oh,
see,
yeah.
at 16, because back then they could
yeah.
teach then, and she taught first over in that area in a sod schoolhouse. When the
I saw.
mhm.
Yeah.
Then later she
And where
taught.
was this?
That was in Logan County before she married.
Was it near Kingfisher?
Yes, on Skeleton Creek near Sheridan now. I believe that's
Mhm,
in that
that's
area.
the
hmm
only-
Then when she moved to the Car Country, she taught in a schoolhouse over there. And by the way,
Were they Indians and whites, or?
well, a lot of whites, very few Indians. They had an Indian school at Washunga, you see,
Yes.
and all of the Indians
Was
attended
that reservation?
Yes, more. I
Indian.
believe it
Uh-huh.
is called that, and they had an agency there, and
That's
the
right.
Indians.
Then they did.
And
So the Indians
she-
were provided with their own schooling
Yes.
and their own education.
that is right. And she taught out in this country school, and she drove a horse and buggy to school every day, and had to build a wood fire. And he
That's what matters.
and one school where she took it on, they said, well, she wouldn't last there 2 months because the older boys were always playing jokes on the teacher and doing things to cause disturbance, and teachers would finally just give up and quit. But she knew this ahead of time, and so when she went there, she gave them chores to do that made them feel that they were being important in helping and asking them to help do. And so she got them, and she continued teaching there and got along just great. But they didn't give her much chance of continuing because of all the trouble they'd had with these older boys. She had 2 students. Harry Weinbrenner, I don't know if you know of him, he became a sculptor on the western coast, and Josh Lee was one of her students also.
Really?
And she was very proud of them. But Harry Weinbrenner was not as...
I wonder if Josh Lee's famous oratory came from her influence.
I think a great deal of it did, because
He was a remarkable speaker.
she liked to get hold of someone who could speak well and try and help them. But Harry Weinbrenner was not as good in some of his subjects, and he could draw quite well, and
She started.
so she bragged on his drawings and how well he did. And later on, he told her when she visited him in California that when people asked him who his first art teacher was, he said Miss Clubb. And she said, "Why'd you say that?" He says, "Because you're the first teacher who ever let me draw in school."
Oh, yes,
And she encouraged him in this. So she said she laughed because she didn't feel she was an art teacher. She loved art, but she never did. She did 2 or 3 charcoals when she was in school at Northwestern, but she never did much art of her own.
Hers was appreciation.
And
you started to tell me about your other 2 daughters. I believe you left that thread hanging.
yes,
They both are interested in art.
yes, they are. Our daughter who lives in Florida, Glenda Sue, named after her father,
Yes.
took fashion and design at OU, and she did some charcoal, but of course it was mainly, she was interested in clothing and that sort of thing, and she went into modeling and also business, but she works at that, but she is also very interested in art. And our younger daughter, who is now attending Central State University, is majoring in art.
And her name
is Cynthia Lee. We call her Cindy. And she wants to become an art teacher or go into commercial art, which she can do either way. And she's seems to be doing very, very well in that line, so I'm glad she's chosen.
I wonder if Miss Clubb realized how far her influence was extending.
I don't know. She surely must know. But
3 granddaughters and 2 famous people.
And
probably others that she didn't know about.
Oh, yes. But we had people come from all over the world to visit the art collection.
That's something I'd like to have you mention. Weren't they surprised to find this collection here?
So many. In one article I read recently, they said they just couldn't imagine driving over the hills and down into this little valley in the bend of the river and finding this. But immediately when they walked in the front door, they were just amazed. They could not
in a place
speak.
of refinement and culture.
And
it must have been in the pioneer Oklahoma days. That must have been an oasis.
She
of
never
art and culture.
Never turned down anyone, and at the drop of a hat, if someone would call up and say, "Ms. Clubb," one of the boys at the desk, well, there's a group of people down here, could you come down and show them through? They would love to have you come. And she'd always go. She loved to show people through, and we had buses of school children. Their teacher would make arrangements to bring them, and she was always very gracious, and because she felt she was doing something for others, you know, she wanted to share all of this. Nothing was ever charged for admission. It was just free, and the little booklet they could buy if they wanted
her
to.
idea, I think, was that of an educator.
Yes.
And she felt that was needed in our Western life here. Many people never got to see these things in other countries or even in big museums in the United States.
That's true.
And bringing it to them, I think, was a wonderful idea of hers.
I just don't know.
Would you mind describing the hotel? It's soon, or has it gone under the river now?
No, it isn't. There will not be water over that area for a while yet. They're building, completing the dam. Later on it will be covered. But it is torn down practically now. But they had time tearing it down.
Did they move it, or?
No, it couldn't be moved at all. It was, my father built it, and he believed in building when he built, and he was afraid of fires, so there was no wood in it whatsoever. The walls were very thick, and it was beautifully decorated. I have a magazine, hotel magazine, that describes it. And it was one of the finest 42-room hotels built at that time.
42 rooms.
Mm-hmm. Had
Well,
sample rooms. And
didn't
then
they
the
try
finishing.
to save that part of
There was
the city?
no.
Wasn't there
It's down
everything?
low. It was
Is
down
it?
the lower part of town, and that will be covered with water. And so the only thing that could be done was to tear it down. I mean, try to get some brick.
Mhm.
And the first man who tried to blast it used 66 sticks of dynamite, and it just blew out a window or two in the front and the part of the entrance. So it was so well built, and they're having a time getting it down, leveled, you know. We sold it, of course. We had to deal with the government. I mean,
Yes.
this is being taken over by the government for the lake. And
But
so
they're finding
on-
difficulty in tearing it down.
Yes, and they, when they came to us to offer us the price, I said, well, that doesn't seem enough. He says, well, it's located here in Ponca City, though. And I said, yes, but they've talked of this dam so long that it's run the town down. However, the hotel was just as good as the day it was built. And I said, in comparison, they are to compare these buildings, to set a price on them. And I said, well, did you find any built like this any place in this area? He hesitated a minute, and he said, oh, no, I didn't.
Sure you did.
And he looked down a little bit when he said it. But, of course, the town went down after the talk started, and it's been talked of for
Maybe
years.
it would
So,
eventually come.
it's been very sad to see these things happen, but I guess this is supposed to be progress.
That's what they call it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like
And-
detours, they used to have the most horrible detours on our roads, you know, and then it would say a sign of progress.
Yes.
Tugged
I
along.
wonder sometimes if they'll, because we have farmland out north, we have 2.5 sections, and the farmland will all be underwater. And so I wonder sometimes if they really will regret taking a lot of this bottom land. But of course, this is
Well,
what's
it's
being
decided
done.
by our government and the legislature, and I'm sure that the need for water in larger areas of lakes and moisture in our country will be beneficial, perhaps in decades yet to come. But I hate to see these old landmarks.
Yes,
going.
that's the sad thing. If this had been someplace else, it's been there from now on, you
Yes.
know.
And
But,
still a show place.
Of course, she, as I said before, she wanted to give her collection to Oklahoma and not be scattered, you know, because so many people, dealers and people from the east come back here and decide among themselves maybe not to bid against one another, and they get them for a song sometimes.
Sometimes they do.
And so maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but
No, that's true. I think it's common knowledge that
Mhm. And so this is her reason for wanting to do this, and she was,
well, she knew their ways because she
Yes.
had bought and dealt with them so much.
yes. And when the collection was given to Philbrook in October of '47, after it was hung and their opening night, we went to that, and they entertained us very nicely over there. And when she was asked to speak, everyone had been so very gracious, and they were dressed in their finery, and she looked beautiful. I have a picture of her where the the president of the Federated Clubs of Oklahoma presented her with a bouquet of red roses at that night. And she got up and started out, and finally she let down a little bit and said something being Scotch-Irish, and then she began telling a few jokes, and they all began enjoying it. You know, it certainly was quite a change from the atmosphere that had been before, but they were very gracious and lovely to her and all of us. And I might mention, perhaps this is known, She held a membership in the Chautauqua Scientific and Literary Circle, and she was the former state art chairman of the Oklahoma Federation of Women's Clubs, and was president of the World Book Club, study club here from the time it was founded. That was in Ponca City. And she was a member of the Oklahoma Memorial Association Hall of Fame, and a member of the Methodist Church. Maybe I better stop.
We'd like to know something about your husband when you can get around to that.
Yes, I mustn't leave him out.
No.
He's a real important person. And he's quite interested in art. And his parents were pioneers of Ponca City also.
Where did you
and
meet him, Miss Conklin?
well, we both went to school in Ponca City, you see,
Oh, yes.
and grew up, but he's enough older than I am, about 3 years, 9 months. But that makes a difference.
At one age, at one time, that's a big difference.
And when they were having their drives, I don't know what you'd call them, they would take train loads to the Rio Grande Valley when they were developing that. And his parents bought land down there, and also my father got some, but Mother always loved this part of the country, and my dad did too, but he was infatuated with the beauty of the country down there and thought he'd like the climate. But she traveled all over and visited. Her parents lived in California later and visited many places, but when she came back to Oklahoma, she says, you can go all over the world, but you can't find any finer place than this. And her friends and the group of women who were in the club there were they were well-educated people and fine. She said you could just go all over and couldn't find any better place or people.
I think it's most interesting the way that the pioneer women organized these culture clubs, and publishers showed that they appreciated the refinement and the culture from the homes that they had come from. And your mother was certainly one of the leaders, not only in the Federated Club work, but in her art appreciation and her artwork.
Well, and I got off of my husband. I said he was real important.
Yes, we just got the VIP in here.
His parents were early day settlers, and his father was interested in many businesses over there, the grain elevators, and he had one in Burbank and also Ponca City. And he had the first, what did they call them, aerodrome theaters back in the early days, and a general store. And they all worked in the store, and he was one of 4 children, and his mother came from Michigan with her parents and met his father shortly after she came there, and they were married in 1906, I believe it was. So he grew up in Ponca City also, but when I went to Brownsville later, after I had gotten up in high school, he paid a little more attention to me then than he did when I was back in grade school, because he was almost 4 years.
You were junior high when he was in high school, and that's a big difference then.
And so we began going together, and it wasn't long after that until we were married.
So really, he was your high school sweetheart then?
Yes.
Oh, that's
But we came back to Ponca City after farming down in Rio Grande Valley 2 years. He went to electrical engineering school in Arlington after we married, and graduated there. And then during the Depression, my father asked us to come back and operate the hotel, and that's how that was to be temporary, and we stayed there and took that on. And also my mother had property, rental property, an apartment house and different things, so we helped with these things. And instead of going into his field that he studied for, he stayed there, and he said, well, we've had a wonderful life. Even though I didn't follow this, it's helped me a great deal in many things. He saved well money by knowing how to fix a lot of things.
That's right.
But he's enjoyed his life, and he says we couldn't have had a more wonderful life anyplace else than we've had here. So we enjoyed our life and rearing our children there in
Where are
Ponca
you
City.
living now?
We live here in Ponca City on Canterbury Avenue.
What is your address?
2409 Canterbury.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How long did you stay in Call City after you knew that the hotel would have to be closed?
We closed the hotel shortly after my mother's death. My father died in September of '51, and Mother 4 months later in January. And we were expecting our last baby, which Cindy. And I had been sick a great deal. I lost both of them, so that was we closed the hotel, and she was born prematurely and only weighed 2 pounds and 11 ounces, but she has been a delight to us. And I thought there was a purpose for her coming because
She was born here in
Ponca City. But we only moved over here in 1967 because the high school was not to be, they were going to transfer the students to Shidler, and we had a business here in Ponca.
So you just came on over.
So we moved over at that time, and that way we wouldn't be coming this direction, and she'd be going another direction to school. And she finished high school here and then entered college at Central State University.
Is she much younger than the two?
She's 15 years younger than the youngest, our other young.
Well, I do know.
She was born
the
in
older girls then were in school.
Yeah.
She was born.
Oh, down to OU. They were very delighted.
Is she at Central State now?
Yes.
I have a daughter, a sophomore at Central State.
She's a sophomore also.
We meet for the years
The voice that you hear now is that of Mr. Easterling of our Historical Society. Mr. Easterling, would you like to add some questions to this most interesting candidate we have here?
Well, it's a delight to be here. I lived 12 years in Kay County. While my major is history and political science and economics, I was pretty much engaged in school budgets and personnel and this type of thing. But it's a delight to be in full-time history work, and if your daddy's a homesteader in the Cherokee Outlet and you've lived in Woods and Harper and Beaver and Kay County, Oklahoma, that's quite a stretch of territory east and west across here. And I have a great love, of course, for the people and the land and the places. And I've often said this is the crossroads of Western history, of the history of the Southern Plains, or the history of the northern part of the Southwest. And no more colorful history has been telescoped into fewer decades than here in our 46th state. I've been in Call City many times, and
Were you at the old hotel?
and I've been in there. I believe it was a nursing home, wasn't it, later on?
Later.
And that's the time I was there. I knew the owner of one of the grain elevators and came over to speak to some farm youth groups, school young people, FFA 4-H, there in Call City. Of course, I followed in the news about the progress of the dam and the lake and moving the city to higher ground, and saw my friend Dave Morgan's name a time or two, and of course interested. I'm very much interested. And now I could talk too long. Is that in the Oklahoma Historical Building near the Capitol in Oklahoma City, I want to get some good art on the walls. I think this is very important. We have some good art. We need more. And of course, I'm looking for some angel to help buy some, but I'd take some on loan and rotate some good art.
That would be wonderful.
If some art center museum is rotating excellent art from their storerooms out to the public and back in, I'll take some on this rotation, display it with proper captions on loan from in the Oklahoma Historical Building where it'll be seen by thousands of people.
Get hold of some with
And
these.
I would love to borrow some from the club collection.
It'd be wonderful. You heard her describing those.
Yes, ma'am.
And then
I'm afraid that will concern
the thing that I thought perhaps you would ask her about was the fact that the culture of this early day pioneer woman and the remarkable collections she was able to get together.
Right.
That it wasn't just the pride of Oklahoma, but it was the pride of all the Southwest and the others.
Culture came real
came
fast
with
to the West because there were people who moved out here
Brought
who
it
were
with
culturally minded. And if you love music and art and literature, one of the finest recitations or old-fashioned reciters I heard in El Reno the other night, 84 years of age, he could recite Edgar Guest, James Whitcomb Riley, and memorize it quickly. Well, it takes you back to the old schoolhouse literary meetings, you know.
Well, as an English teacher, that used to be required. You know, this memory work was part of the course.
That was declamation.
Yes.
I memorized yards of scripture and yards of English poetry.
Her mother was a graduate in oratory, and she taught Josh Lee. And we were just discussing how interesting it was, the influence that she had on these people.
I've heard Josh Lee. I was a high school, junior college, and college debater. My last debate experience was Northwestern State at Alva. And just, you mentioned the culture on the plains. Was just think in 1894, a homesteader was building his sod house to get out of a half dugout since 1893.
I know what they were.
In less than 30 years, there were cultural museums. Mr. Marlin was building his second home, which was his country home out here, in less than 30 years. Think of the economic development in ranching and oil that underwrote galleries and art and music.
That was something, wasn't it? I wondered if you didn't have one or two incidents of your early life now you'd like to tell us, or something that you remember of the parents.
Well, didn't I tell you that at the beginning? About my pony?
Yes.
And it's about the Sweet Williams on the desk. And, there are many things I'm sure I'll
Think of later.
think of later
Make a
on.
second one.
I wanted to mention, too, that I can never remember of any program being held there for any, they used to raise money for the school for different things, that my mother wasn't asked to give a reading, and of course she was applauded on many times for more, and she enjoyed it thoroughly.
And he was an orator, so he was quite the speaker as well as the artist.
And she was very much interested in getting cultural things brought to Ponca City. And they used to have, was it Lyceum?
Yes.
And she had a tenor who came from Chicago to sing, and was.
Did she underwrite these people who came?
She always made. Well, there was a group that worked together, more or less. This group.
I remember how they were brought to a small town.
And they entertained at our school auditorium usually. But she was very much in the back of most of those things and trying to get things brought to the town that would be beneficial to, and be appreciated by everyone. And I know that my father was very fond of our eldest daughter because she was so close to, was with him
The
a
first
great deal.
grandchild.
And he thought a lot of the others, but she just happened to be the one that was.
This is Mrs. Bob Klein. It's her
Live here.
And she works for Continental in the graphics art department. She majored in art, I told her before, and her husband is in auditing. And his parents were from Ponca City. They live here in Ponca. He was a banker over at Ponca City. But started to tell about that. They've all been very interested in art, and they're writing a book and enlarging pictures of Ponca City from 1902 through 1972.
Who's doing this?
My eldest daughter and her husband.
Oh, really?
And they have all the equipment and have gone to the Oklahoma City to get a lot of material.
We surely want a copy for our Oklahoma History Library.
Oh, it's going to be quite a thing.
We want an autograph copy of that.
It'd be the history of Ponca City, wouldn't it?
Yes.
With illustrations.
And then at the time it was first just started until they had to start moving out. Of course, they're having to go out now. Within this month, I believe they're supposed to.
Is this the month to find?
Well, see, the government owns all that property now, and if you want to move anything out, they want it out of the way because they are trying to get a bridge built across and a road across to the other side, so that will be the end of it. I'll be glad when the water's over it now, since it's gone as far as it has.
How many years has it been since the hotel was closed?
We didn't close it till about 1968. In November. But you see, we had leased it as a nursing home, and people felt then that the water was over the town. You know, a lot of people get the idea. And naturally didn't want to place there. But we went all over the state, spent a year trying to decide what we would do with the building because it was of such a, well built. And at that time, nursing homes weren't very
prevalent. No, that's true.
And they weren't very nice, many of them. We know they've come a long way since then. And we wanted to use it for something of that nature, or for a children's home or retired home or something, until it could be, something
done with it.
Very
prevalent. No, that's true.
And they weren't very nice, many of them. We know they've come a long way since then. And we wanted to use it for something of that nature, or for a children's home or retired home or something, until it could be, something
done with it. Well, we're out of tape. We're so glad, wasn't it? We're so glad to have you on tape, Mrs. Conklin. And if you think of other things, we can easily make an addition to this, because this is a very rich field for Oklahoma history. And we appreciate your addition to it. It's been very pleasant to meet you and to interview you. Mr. Easterly?
We're very glad to be here. Penn Woods is doing an excellent job. He calls it living legends, but I call it living history.
It really is.
Oral history is another term, but I think our Oklahoma is unique in preparing some of the chapters in Oklahoma history that we're doing. It's the sights and sounds and voices of actual history, and I hope this will cause our student generations to be better citizens in Oklahoma and the U.S. of A. Because I had to depend too much on my mind. Now I'd have a lot more visual aids and sounds. This is great. Thank you.
My daughter calls me, she is the secretary of the National Organization of Oral History, Mrs. Fry of Berkeley, California, the Bancroft Library. And she calls Mr. Woods the ideal man from Oklahoma.
Good.
And she has often had him write articles for library periodicals.
She's at Berkeley and Bancroft Library.
She's at Bancroft there.
I have
in the oral history there.
I've had friends at the Huntington Library at San Marino, so I'll remember this next time.
She's assistant director there, Mrs. Ball, and she were the first to put on there. I believe we're